Hey guys, tonight we're wandering into the lantern-lit alleys of Edo-Era Japan, where the air smells like river mist and roasted chestnuts, and the silence is never quite empty. Imagine creaking wooden homes, rice paper walls, and distant temple bells echoing off stone. Now picture yourself in a yukata, maybe slightly too tight because it turns out you don't know how to tie it, shuffling down a cobbled path in geta sandals that click too loud for your comfort. Shadows move just a bit too independently, and someone, or something, is always just out of view. You've stepped into a world where even the ghosts have good manners, but they only knock once. You probably won't survive this. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I love seeing where you're all listening from around the world. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're walking beside a sluggish canal, the kind that seems half asleep even during the day. At night, it barely ripples. Overhead, paper lanterns swing gently from bamboo poles, glowing faintly like low-hanging moons. A dog barks once, then never again. The air smells faintly of grilled fish, incense and old wood, humid and a little sweet, like a lacquer box kept too long in a drawer. This is Edo, the old name for Tokyo, back when samurai still walked the streets and ghosts knocked only once to be let inside. You pass a small tea house. It's closed, but a single cup of green tea sits untouched at the edge of the engawa, the wooden veranda. It's still steaming. No one's around. Most nights you wouldn't even notice, but tonight you've heard the stories. They always begin the same way. Someone walking alone, late, footsteps that echo too perfectly, and a single knock. Always just one. Because the polite ghosts of Edo believed in etiquette, even in death. One knock was enough. Any more would be rude. This wasn't a time when people casually dismissed the supernatural as superstition. No, the supernatural was practically a genre of public entertainment. Kabuki plays retold ghost stories by candlelight. Woodblock prints illustrated yude, ghosts with long black hair, no feet, and pale, mournful expressions. You'd find them pasted beside illustrations of sumo wrestlers in food stalls because ghosts were just part of daily life, like bad weather or nosy neighbors. It's around the Genroku period, late 1600s. The city is bustling with nearly 1 million people, samurai, merchants, farmers, and performers all squeezed together. The city hums with orderly chaos, but underneath that, always a quiet hum of otherness. Shrines tucked into alleys, omamori charms hanging from doorways, and people who, when they heard a knock in the night, would not open the door. You pass a row of homes. All of them are shuttered, doors closed tight, but you notice something odd. One door has a small, clean cup of sake just outside the step. Not tipped over, not dusty, recently placed. The wind doesn't touch it. You keep walking. Here's a mainstream fact to settle into. Edo was a city of rules. Everything had a code. Class, clothing, behavior, even ghosts. There were precise rituals for laying the dead to rest. But if someone died with resentment, or if the burial was sloppy, no prayers, no incense, no final bow, they might return. Not with screams or blood, but with a soft rustle, a faint knock. And then, silence. There's a fringe tale from the Kanda district about a woman named Tame, who lived alone with her cat and sold pickled radish on the side. One night, she vanished. All that was found was a single knock heard by her neighbor and a trail of wet geta prints leading to her door. The prints led in, but never came out. They say her ghost sometimes leaves pickled radish at doorsteps during Oban season. Weirdly kind, if slightly pungent. Historians still argue whether the knocking ghost tradition came from imported Chinese ghost tales or evolved from indigenous beliefs about boundary spirits, the ones that sit between worlds and politely ask to cross over. Whatever the origin, Edo had no shortage of door knockers. You turn a corner. A cat stares at you from a tiled roof. Doesn't blink. just stares. Then vanishes without moving. Typical. You pass a small neighborhood shrine. The steps are worn, and there's a bell with a thick braided rope, meant to summon the kami. Someone's already rung it tonight. The clapper sways gently, but no breeze touches your cheek. At the base of the shrine, 3 small cups of rice wine sit next to a folded paper crane. The offerings aren't for gods tonight. Morning in Edo doesn't arrive like a shout. It sort of sighs into place. The sky goes from black to slate to something approaching blue, and the sounds start small. The soft splash of water being scooped from a bucket, the distant tap of a bamboo fountain, a sleepy rooster with 0 sense of personal volume control. You stretch slowly, like a cat that still hasn't forgiven the floor for being cold. The futon creaks under you as if to say, "We're still alive, huh?" That knock from before feels like a fever dream now. The single con in the dark, like a borrowed breath that wasn't yours to hold. But daylight doesn't mean ghosts are gone, not in Edo. Here's your daily wake-up fact. Edo-Era Japan held a firm belief that yurei, or spirits, were not restricted to nighttime haunting. Sure, the night made it easier for them to appear, and for you to believe in them, but certain stories place these spirits right in the middle of crowded markets, or schoolyards, or riverbanks in full sun. It wasn't about the hour, it was about unresolved intent. You slide open the door and step out onto the wooden engawa. The air smells like steamed rice and wood smoke. Someone nearby is pounding mochi, thud, 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 and you feel your heart sinking with it. Nothing unusual on the porch, no offerings, no footprints. That same chill of something almost happened lingers behind your ears like a tune you can't remember. Back inside, you sip from a fresh teacup, not the one from last night, let's not tempt fate. And while your hands wrap around the porcelain, warm and grounding, you remember the tale of the blind innkeeper of Ueno. She was real, at least that's what every regional ghost anthology insists. Blind from childhood, she ran a modest inn on the edge of the city, and was known for always knowing when a guest arrived, even before they knocked. She would shuffle down the hall and greet them at the door, nodding politely, never wrong. Then one night, she opened the door before anyone could reach it, but no one was there. Still, she bowed and welcomed the guest in, led them to a room, laid out tea. The next morning, she was gone. So was the teacup, just a single wet footprint left on the tatami. Fringe or fact? Hard to tell. Some scholars suggest the tale's an allegory for intuition, seeing the unseen. Others insist it was a cautionary note on hospitality. Don't overextend kindness to the wrong visitors. You finish your tea, glancing at the untouched cup from the night before, cold now, still just sitting there like it's waiting for someone else. Midday slips by in that way travel time always does, both fast and strange. The innkeeper doesn't mention any ghosts. She offers you pickled vegetables and a warning about the bathhouse down the road, where the steam sometimes smells like sulfur even on clear days. Minerals, she says, but you clock the slight hesitation before she smiles. You decide to go anyway, because what better place to test your nerve than a hot spring once rumored to host a weeping spirit who never entered the water? This brings us to one of the more intriguing elements of Edo ghost lore. Certain spirits refuse to cross thresholds, especially into bathing areas. The reasoning, if you could call it that, was that the purifying nature of water clashed with the ghost's reason for existing in the first place. Bathhouses were considered clean, ritually and spiritually, and a yurei built from resentment or guilt couldn't survive long there. But they could knock. Oh yes, they could knock. There's a well-documented story from 1791 about a woman who rented an upstairs room at a public bathhouse in Asakusa. Each evening, as the steam rose and guests laughed below, she would hear a single knock on the wooden beam above her head. Never below, always above. Eventually, she nailed a warding charm into the ceiling. The knock stopped, but the next morning, the charm was gone, and her pillow had been gently turned sideways. That's the thing. The polite ghosts didn't destroy. They rearranged. You reach the bathhouse just after sundown, the sky bruised with streaks of indigo and plum. The water is warm, welcoming, and yes, smells faintly of minerals and something else you choose not to name. You soak, trying to convince your brain that ghosts probably hate eucalyptus. But your brain isn't helpful. It remembers that the most well-mannered ghosts usually didn't come when you were alone. They arrived when you were relaxed, off guard, clean. They waited until you exhaled, then knocked, like they were returning a borrowed robe. Historians still argue whether this concept, that ghosts obeyed bathing taboos, comes from Shinto beliefs about purity, or if it was a clever way to keep children from falling asleep in the hot springs and drowning. Either way, outside, the night settles like silk. Heavy, smooth, a little cool against the skin. You don't remember falling asleep exactly. One minute you're half watching the shadows shift across the ceiling, the next you're upright, unsure why. No dreams, just a feeling. You check the door. Still shut. No second knock. That's how you know they're the polite kind. This next bit's tricky to explain without sounding like you're fully losing it. But in Edo-Era ghost stories, that one knock was more than sound. It was an invitation, a test. Would you open the door? Would you acknowledge them? And, most important, would you owe them anything? Because in Japan at the time, obligation was everything. Debts, gratitude, honor. You didn't mess with those balances. And the dead? They kept ledgers too. There's a scroll story from 1714, handwritten and passed around like ghostly fan mail, about a carpenter named Genbei. He returned late from a festival, a little drunk on sweet sake, and heard a knock just as he was slipping off his sandals. He chuckled, ignored it, and went to bed. The next morning, he found a single footprint made of ash just inside his doorway. Nothing else. No sounds that night. But within the week, every board in his house warped. His tools rusted overnight. His sawdust curled the wrong way. He never heard the knock again, but he sure felt it. Historians still argue whether Genbei's tale was a metaphor for guilt. He'd once borrowed a sum from a dying neighbor, or so the rumor went, and never repaid it. Others say it's just Edo-Era workman's campfire stuff. But who goes around drawing footprints in ash, honestly? You sit up, futon creasing beneath you, and stretch. Your neck crackles like a drying rice cracker. Outside the window, the sky's still black. Not morning yet, but maybe closer to it than you thought. There's that moment, just before dawn, where the dark feels different. Not deeper, just tired. You pad quietly across the tatami to peek through the rice paper screen. Nothing on the Engawa. No offerings. No footprints. Just the moon, bloated and heavy, resting low over the tiled rooftops. Here's a mainstream fact for you. In Edo, doors weren't knocked on with knuckles. That's a Western thing. People used the back of their hand or the side of the fist. So the knock sounded softer, more like a polite pat than a request to break in. It's said that the knocking ghosts copied this form. They weren't banging to be let in, they were bowing, with sound. This idea gave rise to one of the more peculiar beliefs in certain Edo districts, that ghosts could be identified by how they knocked. A knock with the left hand? Ghost. Too polite. Human visitors always use the right. That sounds absurd until you realize how formal Edo etiquette really was. People trained for years just to serve tea without insulting someone's ancestors. Hand choice was definitely a thing. You slip quietly back into your futon, still warm. The cup on the table, still there. You don't touch it. There's a fringe detail from a traveling monk's journal circa 1802, where he described visiting a small town outside Edo and being told never to answer the first knock on a stormy night. Not because of the ghost, because they might bring someone else. Apparently, the polite ones sometimes came in pairs. One to knock, the other to watch from the roof. That's one way to ruin your evening tea. And yet, these weren't vengeful spirits. Not always. Many were known for small, oddly kind behaviors. One ghost reportedly relit extinguished lanterns in the same neighborhood every rainy evening. Another returned a lost comb through a sliding door, gently placing it beside the futon before vanishing. Still, you didn't want them too comfortable. You roll onto your stomach. Your head rests in the crook of your arm. The soft crinkle of the futon beneath you is almost like wind in tall grass. You start to drift again. The silence is thick, the kind that holds its breath with you. And then, Khan. Again. Just once. This time from the shoji behind your head. You freeze, of course, because that's not the door. That's the inner panel, the one leading nowhere but another room. You didn't hear it slide, just the knock, just the polite single ask. You wait. 1 heartbeat. 2. You whisper nothing this time. One of the stranger scholarly debates about Edo ghost stories revolves around whether these spirits operated on intent or ritual. Were they trying to enter and needed permission, or were they just going through motions they'd repeated in life? Some historians believe the ghosts weren't even aware they were dead, that the knock wasn't for you. You settle into the room, the soft crunch of tatami beneath your feet like a welcome sigh. The walls are thin, but the quiet is so complete you could hear a mosquito sneeze, if that's even a thing. The lantern hanging from the ceiling glows dimly, casting a buttery light over the rice paper screens, making the shadows feel longer than they should be. You sit beside the lacquer table, and the teacups still warm to the touch, steaming ever so faintly. No one knocks, not yet. Here's something odd. In Edo, people didn't fear ghosts because they were violent, not usually. They feared them because they were persistent. Respectful, sure, formal even, but once a ghost had a reason to visit, an unpaid debt, a broken promise, or a funeral ritual skipped for convenience, they would come. They wouldn't yell, they wouldn't rattle chains, they'd knock once and wait. That's the thing about Edo-Era yurei. They weren't just undead, they were well-mannered. Always dressed properly, always in white, the color of death and purity. Hair long and loose, framing pale faces like mourning veils. And always, always quiet. No loud haunting, just silent appearances. You'd look up from your rice bowl and, bam, there's a ghost in the corner, watching, expressionless. Social anxiety, but supernatural. You lie back, folding your hands over your chest, eyes drifting upward as the lantern flickers. That cup of tea? Still steaming, still untouched. You're not drinking it. You remember the saying, if you drink what a ghost leaves for you, you take their place. Probably an old wives' tale, but tonight's not the night to experiment. Now, a solid mainstream historical note. In the Edo period, particularly during the Tokugawa shogunate's rule, Japan experienced a long era of peace and relative isolation. People lived under strict social orders: samurai, peasants, artisans, and merchants. With limited mobility and strict codes of conduct, emotional expression got, well, rerouted. And some say that's where these ghost stories came in. Outlets for grief, love, betrayal, regret. Things that couldn't be expressed in life returned in death. You roll onto your side. The sliding door is shut, but your ears strain for that soft signature "con." Just once, just enough to make your spine think about sitting up. You ever wonder why ghosts knocking only once was considered polite? It's one of those fringe details that rarely shows up in textbooks. Some say it mirrors samurai etiquette, where one respectful knock or tap was customary before entering a superior's room. More than one knock would imply impatience, even aggression. And a ghost, no matter how tragic or bloodied, was never to be seen as uncouth. The horror came not from their violence, but their civility. There's a chilling phrase from a 1783 diary by a merchant in Nihonbashi. I heard a single knock. I did not open. The next night, only silence. That was my answer. Short, poetic, terrifying. You blink slowly. The lantern creaks above you, not from movement, but from cooling metal. You've already checked the room once. No hidden corners, no second shadows. But that teacup, still warm. You remember a tale from an Osaka alley. Yes, outside Edo technically, but let's not split hairs with the dead. A housewife named Okiku died of grief after her husband sold her comb without asking. She came back not with shrieks, but by tapping once on the wooden floor at sunset. Each night, just one tap. As if to say, I'm still waiting for you to apologize. Historians still argue whether these one-knock tales were cautionary morality fables or reflections of a culture so steeped in hierarchy that even their supernatural beings bowed and followed protocol. The truth is probably both and neither. Ghosts, like people, resist being boxed up neatly, even if they were buried in perfect lines. You shift onto the futon. The walls creak, but not in a spooky way, more like old knees complaining in the dark. You start to drift, and then, there it is. Con. One soft knock. From the door. Not a bang, not even a tap. Just a suggestion, like the ghost's equivalent of, "Excuse me, terribly sorry, but..." You don't move. You definitely don't respond. You're not rude, but you are sleepy. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe the inn has paper-thin walls and someone next door dropped something. That's what you tell yourself, though you heard it perfectly. Not loud, just right. Back in the Edo period, people believed that spirits needed permission to enter. A single knock was that request. If you answered, even just by acknowledging it, they were in. Not just the house, you. You awake again, not quite sure how long you've been out. The dimness of the room wraps around you like a thick blanket, muffling sounds and softening edges. Outside, the shadows of paper lanterns stretch long and thin across the polished wooden floors of the inn. There's a certain calm to this kind of darkness, not the kind that rattles your nerves, but the gentle, knowing quiet that feels like a promise. You're back in Edo's humdrum world, where lantern light guides the way and evening markets close with soft calls fading into the distance. The ghost stories you've heard aren't just tales here. They're woven into everyday life, like the silk threads of a kimono or the delicate brushstrokes of a calligraphy scroll. A historical fact floats up as you move toward the low table to pour a cup of tea. The Edo period was one of the longest-lasting peacetimes in Japan's history, spanning over 250 years without major wars. That stability shaped everything, from social order to the arts and even how people thought about death and the afterlife. So, with no battles or invasions to fear, the mysteries of the spirit world found a comfortable place in people's minds. And yet, beneath this peaceful surface, there's a darker nuance. The polite ghost who knocks only once isn't just a ghost, it's a symbol. A reminder that unresolved feelings linger. Loss, guilt, regret, all bottled up in the strict social codes of the time. You probably won't survive this mental tug-of-war without feeling a little eerie. There's an intriguing fringe story about a particular neighborhood in Edo called Fukagawa. This was a bustling district near the waterways, known for its docks and warehouses. Fishermen, merchants, and laborers mingled, and with that mix came a plethora of ghost stories. One, in particular, tells of a ghost who would appear only during the rainy season, knocking once on the wooden shutters of houses near the canal. This ghost wasn't angry or vengeful. It was said to be a drowned child, trying to remind people to be careful near the water. This detail brings in an ongoing scholarly debate about the role of water in Edo-era ghost tales. Some historians argue that water symbolized the boundary between life and death, a crossing point where spirits were more likely to manifest. Others believe the association was practical. Water was dangerous, especially for the common folk, so stories of ghosts served as cautionary tales to keep children and careless adults safe. You sit back and sip your tea slowly, the warmth grounding you in the present, even as your mind drifts to that single knock, the one you still can't shake from last night. A breeze flutters the curtains, carrying the faint scent of pine and a distant river. You lean forward and notice the faint outline of a woodblock print hanging on the wall. It depicts a ghostly woman in white, hair loose and flowing, standing beside a bridge under a full moon. The title reads simply, "The Waiting One." You can't help but wonder what she's waiting for. The room is quiet, except for the soft ticking of a clock and the occasional creak from the old wooden beams. You feel the weight of centuries pressing in, an unspoken pact between the living and the dead to acknowledge each other's presence without crossing certain boundaries. Another quirky detail from the folklore: in some parts of Edo, it was believed that if you heard a ghost knock once and didn't respond, the spirit would leave a small token behind: a coin, a flower petal, or a piece of fabric. These tokens were seen as both a blessing and a warning, marking the spot where the living and the dead briefly touched. Historians still argue whether these tokens were real relics of ancient superstitions or later inventions meant to romanticize and sell stories. You stare at the print a moment longer, feeling a strange kinship with that waiting figure. Then your gaze falls on the untouched teacup beside you, still there from last night. The steam long gone, but the sense of something lingering very much alive. You blink slowly and lean back again. Somewhere outside, a wooden geta clacks on stone, steady and rhythmic. Like footsteps, but not quite. You close your eyes, and you swear you hear a knock. One knock. Not loud, not urgent, just a polite, soft tap. The knock echoes faintly in your mind as you sink deeper into the futon, the cool fabric brushing your cheek. It's a sound that feels both distant and intimate, like a secret whispered in a crowded room. You're not scared anymore, not really, just curious. Curious about what comes next and why these polite ghosts insist on such minimalism. You reach out toward the teacup on the table, as if touching it could somehow anchor you to this moment, keep the ghosts from slipping into your thoughts like mist. It's still cold, untouched from last night. You wonder if anyone else has ever dared to drink from a cup left by a spirit's presence. Here's a mainstream fact to settle your nerves. In Edo-Era Japan, tea was more than just a beverage, it was a ritual. Every movement in the tea ceremony, from how you held the cup to the way you sipped, was loaded with meaning. The tea itself symbolized purity, calm, and a fleeting moment of harmony. So the fact that a ghost's presence was often marked by a forgotten or half-finished cup of tea makes a strange kind of sense. But there's a quirky twist in the tale of ghostly tea. In some Edo folktales, a ghost's offering of tea was a test of the living's hospitality and respect. If you accepted the tea, you might be bound to repay the favor, sometimes in ways you'd rather not imagine. Refuse, and you risked offending the spirit. The polite knock was the first step in this delicate dance. Historians still argue whether this was a real social practice or more of a symbolic story used to teach manners and caution in the community. Either way, the idea that ghosts expected politeness adds a touch of warmth to what could otherwise be a terrifying encounter. You let your fingers trail along the smooth rim of the cup, the porcelain cool against your skin. The room feels alive in a different way now, like the air is holding its breath with you, waiting for your next move. Outside, the wind rustles bamboo leaves, the sound sharp and crisp. Somewhere nearby, a small bell jingles, likely from a temple or shrine. The echoes remind you of how interconnected life and death were believed to be in Edo society. Spirits weren't just about fear, they were part of daily existence, woven into festivals, prayers, and even architecture. Speaking of architecture, did you know that many Edo homes had tiny spirit rooms or niches? These weren't shrines per se, but small spaces where families left offerings to ancestors and local spirits. It was a way to keep things polite and orderly. After all, who wants an uninvited ghost barging into the kitchen? There's a fringe detail in the stories about these spirit rooms. Some say that ghosts who knocked only once were those who hadn't been properly invited into these spaces. They waited outside the threshold, ever so politely, hoping for acknowledgement or acceptance. You find yourself imagining what that must feel like, being on the edge, wanting to enter, but held back by invisible rules. Your eyelids grow heavy, the edges of your vision softening like ink spreading on wet paper. The teacup remains cool and still. And then, just before sleep pulls you under, the knock comes again, so faint you might have dreamed it. Once. Just once. The silence stretches on, punctuated only by your own breathing and the distant murmur of the city settling deeper into night. The single knock still lingers in your mind, like the last note of a melody fading into quiet. You realize that this knock is more than sound. It's a moment, a breath, a bridge between what you see and what you sense but cannot quite grasp. You recall how Edo society was deeply structured around rituals and etiquette, even in the smallest details. The act of knocking, whether by a living visitor or a ghost, was never casual. It was a formal introduction, a way of asking permission to cross a threshold, to enter a space of safety and warmth. Here's a little-known historical fact. Some inns and tea houses in Edo kept special registers of unusual events. Ghost sightings, mysterious noises, and polite knockings included. These records were treated seriously, almost like weather logs, and were often shared among trusted networks. Imagine that, polite ghosts getting their own footnotes in history. On the quirky side, some stories describe ghosts who knocked once and left behind a small gift, like a folded crane made from old paper, or a piece of seaweed shaped like a leaf. These tokens were believed to be blessings or subtle messages, a sign that the spirit was at peace or seeking peace. Historians still debate whether these gifts were physical artifacts or metaphorical symbols that grew from oral storytelling traditions, but their presence enriches the folklore with a layer of hopeful kindness. You sit quietly, feeling the weight of those unspoken exchanges. The knock is polite, yes, but it also carries the weight of centuries of human fear, hope, and the desire to connect. The air outside the window shifts, carrying the scent of wet earth and distant pine. A single moth flutters past the paper window, its wings barely brushing the surface. You watch it, mesmerized by the delicate dance. In the background, a faint hum rises, a fan or maybe the gentle whisper of the night itself. You think back to the story of the blind innkeeper, how her kindness bridged the gap between worlds. Maybe that's the secret to these polite ghosts. They're not here to scare, but to remind us to be gentle, patient, and respectful, even with the unknown. The knock fades into the background now, blending with the night sounds and your slow, steady breathing. You close your eyes again, letting sleep take you deeper into that quiet, polite world where ghosts knock once and wait. Morning creeps in again, but this time it feels different, softer, more deliberate, as if the world is waking gently from a long, uneasy dream. You peel back the shoji screens, letting a pale wash of light spill into the room. The teacup, that quiet sentinel from the night, glistens faintly in the morning sun, still untouched. You almost expect it to have cooled off even further, but it seems to hold a kind of warmth, like a memory that hasn't quite faded. Remember that blind innkeeper? She believed the spirits who knocked only once were not there to haunt, but to be acknowledged. In fact, in Edo folklore, there was this curious custom of leaving an empty seat and cup for the polite ghosts during certain festivals. It was a way to honor them without inviting chaos. You probably won't survive the awkwardness if a ghost turns up at your dinner party uninvited, but Edo folks made room with grace. That brings us to a fascinating fact about Edo's social rituals. Respect and formality weren't just for people, they extended to spirits too. A knock wasn't a demand, but a request for recognition, a subtle tap on the door of existence. There's a fringe belief that some ghosts were actually former samurai or merchants stuck in a moment of unfinished business, who maintained their strict code of etiquette even in death. They knocked once, bowed invisibly, and waited, never imposing themselves, never overstaying their welcome. Historians still argue whether these customs were widespread or localized to certain regions, but what's clear is the cultural importance placed on politeness, living or not. You stretch and reach for your clothes laid neatly on a tatami mat. Outside, the world buzzes back to life. Vendors shouting, children playing, the occasional clatter of a wooden cart. You take a deep breath and step outside, feeling the warm sun on your skin and the cool breeze teasing your hair. The streets of Edo are a tapestry of sounds and scents. The smell of fresh fish mingles with roasted chestnuts, and the chatter of townsfolk fills the air. The city feels alive, but there's an undercurrent of reverence, an unspoken acknowledgement of the unseen neighbors who still linger just beyond the edges of perception. You walk toward the bustling market, where merchants hawk their goods and samurai in quiet corners keep watch. A small child tugs at her mother's sleeve, pointing at a wooden doll with painted eyes that seem to follow you around the stall. You pause, remembering the story of the single knock. In some tales, children were the first to hear it, soft taps in the night, a polite invitation to play or listen. It was said that ignoring the knock was a way to keep the spirits at bay, but acknowledging it could bring blessings, or sometimes mischief. The debate among scholars is lively here. Were these stories meant to teach children manners and caution, or were they genuine accounts of supernatural encounters? The truth is probably somewhere in between. As the day wears on, you find yourself drawn back to the inn, where the evening awaits with its familiar shadows and that single, polite knock. You pour fresh tea and set the cup down gently on the table, a silent offering for the ghost who never overstays their welcome. Outside, the sun dips low, casting long shadows across the streets of Edo. The city breathes, alive with stories old and new, seen and unseen. And as night falls once more, you listen carefully, waiting for the polite knock that promises a quiet conversation in the dark. Night settles softly again, wrapping the city in a blanket of ink and starlight. The air is cooler now, carrying the faint scent of incense from a nearby temple. You slide the shoji closed behind you, the paper panel whispering shut with a sound like a secret shared. The room feels smaller in this kind of darkness, more intimate, almost as if the walls themselves are leaning in to listen. You sit cross-legged on the tatami, the rough weave pressing lightly against your skin. The teacup waits patiently on the table, a quiet reminder of last night's visitor, the polite ghost who knocked only once. You wonder if it's still there, or if it's just your imagination tangled with memories. A fact to keep your mind busy. In the Edo period, the concept of mujo, the impermanence of all things, was deeply ingrained in the culture. People accepted that life was fleeting, like cherry blossoms in the wind, and this acceptance shaped their views on spirits and death. Polite ghosts knocking once, maybe they're echoes of this belief, gentle reminders of life's fragile edge. But then there's this quirky bit. Some Edo-era writings describe ghosts as wearing what you might call fashionable haunting attire. Imagine a spirit dressed in the latest kimono style of its day, complete with elegant hairpins and carefully folded sleeves. It's like a ghostly fashion show, with spirits making their polite appearances in proper style. Historians still argue whether these descriptions were meant literally or metaphorically. Were spirits really imagined this way, or was it a way for storytellers to make ghosts relatable and less terrifying? Outside, the sound of rain begins, tapping softly on the wooden eaves. The patter is steady, a rhythmic lullaby that blends perfectly with the night. You think about the drowned child ghost from the canal, knocking once in the rainy season, a polite warning wrapped in sorrow. The rain blurs the world outside your window, turning the city into a watercolor painting. Lights shimmer through the haze, and distant footsteps echo faintly on wet stones. You lean back, the floor cool beneath you, and close your eyes. The knock is almost drowned out by the rain, but you swear it's still there, soft, patient, polite. There's an old saying that if you listen closely, the knocking ghost can teach you about the boundaries between the living and the dead, about respect and restraint, and about the stories we tell to keep fear at bay. You imagine the ghost tapping lightly, waiting for permission to enter, waiting for you to show that same respect. Your eyelids grow heavy again, and the rain's gentle rhythm becomes a soft heartbeat, pulling you towards dreams where polite ghosts and quiet knockings dance just beyond the edge of sleep. You drift into sleep with the rain's gentle tap still echoing, only to find yourself walking through a narrow alleyway in Edo, the cobblestones slick with last night's drizzle. The lanterns cast pools of golden light, their flickering flames struggling against the soft mist curling at your feet. It feels both familiar and strange, as if you've stepped into a dream that borrows pieces from the stories you've heard, but stitches them together in a way you've never quite seen. You remember that Edo was a city of rules, not just for the living, but for spirits too. The polite ghosts knocking only once weren't random intruders, but visitors who understood the invisible social contract. They respected the boundaries as much as any samurai or merchant would, embodying the period's deep sense of order and harmony. One well-known historical fact, Edo was home to one of the world's largest cities in the 18th century, bustling with over 1 million residents. With so many people packed into wooden houses and narrow streets, it's no surprise that ghost stories flourished as a way to explain strange noises and unexpected encounters. And here's a quirky tidbit. Some Edo residents believed that the knock itself carried a specific tone, almost musical, unique to each ghost. These ghost knocks were said to reveal the spirit's mood or intention. A sharp knock might mean urgency, but the single soft tap was always a mark of politeness and restraint. Scholars still argue whether these beliefs influenced Edo's urban soundscape, or if the sounds inspired the stories. Was it a feedback loop between imagination and reality? As you walk the alley, a faint breeze carries the scent of sandalwood and something else, something bittersweet, like wilted cherry blossoms. You spot a flicker of white fabric fluttering near a doorway and catch your breath. Could it be one of those polite ghosts, perhaps waiting for acknowledgement? In the distance, a temple bell tolls softly, its deep reverberation rolling through the streets. Bells in Edo weren't just timekeepers, they also symbolized the thin veil between worlds, ringing to keep malevolent spirits at bay or guide lost souls home. You pause, feeling the quiet weight of centuries in that moment, the countless polite knockings, the rituals, the silence between sounds. And then you hear it again, a single, soft knock, just outside the door. You don't move. You don't respond. You just listen. The night breathes around you, calm and patient, waiting for what comes next. That single knock, kon, rings softly through the quiet of the room, like a gentle tap on a window pane in a midnight rain. You lie still, your breath slowing, muscles loosening. The sound isn't frightening anymore. It's almost familiar, like the polite ghost is trying to tell you something, or maybe just reminding you it's still there, waiting patiently. You reach out instinctively to the teacup again, but your fingers hesitate mid-air. There's something respectful about leaving things as they are, about not disturbing the quiet conversation between you and whatever invisible visitor lingers beyond the paper walls. A quick historical note. During the Edo period, knockers, or koshi, weren't just about announcing visitors. They were symbols of social hierarchy and etiquette. A servant would knock differently than a noble, and people knew to listen carefully. So a single knock from a ghost might not just be a call, it could be a message wrapped in manners and meaning. Here's a quirky twist. Some Edo folklore suggests that ghosts who knocked only once were often spirits who had unfinished business, but were too polite or restrained to demand entry. Their singular knock was both a plea and a polite excuse. Kind of like when someone emails you once and never follows up, only spookier. Scholars still debate if this was really how people thought about spirits, or if these stories evolved later to explain odd noises and creaks in old wooden houses. Either way, it's clear that manners mattered, both in life and after death. You think back to that story of the blind innkeeper and her mysterious guest. The silent presence, the missing teacup, the wet footprint on the tatami. That tale isn't just eerie, it's a reflection of how people coped with the unknown, weaving kindness into fear. Outside, a cicada hums faintly, a summer sound that feels oddly out of place in the quiet dusk. You imagine the ghost hovering just beyond the sliding door, waiting to be acknowledged, waiting for you to decide whether to open or to stay silent. You breathe deeply, letting the slow rhythm of the room settle around you. The futon beneath your body feels softer, the air warmer. In some Edo districts, it was believed that answering the knock, even just once, could bring peace to restless spirits. But ignore it, and the ghost might linger longer, knocking gently through the years. This brings up another fringe idea. Some spirits were said to become polite ghosts because they were stuck in limbo, unsure if they should cross over or remain behind. The knock was their way of reaching out without intruding, hoping for a kind gesture to guide them on. You imagine the spirit's patience, knocking only once, not banging or shouting, waiting for you to understand, waiting for you to respect the boundary. Your eyes grow heavier. The quiet tap fades into the backdrop of the room's creaks and sighs. The teacup sits silently beside you, an unspoken invitation and a delicate reminder. You close your eyes again, and for a moment, just before sleep fully claims you, the knock comes one last time. Once. Polite, patient, waiting. You wake with the first light of dawn filtering softly through the paper screens, the room holding on to a peaceful silence. The single knock feels like a distant echo now, less urgent, more like a polite goodbye or a gentle promise to return. You stretch, feeling the tatami beneath you, cool and familiar. There's a historical fact tucked in here. Many Edo homes had small altars called butsudan, where families honored their ancestors daily. This ritual kept the spirits close, part of everyday life rather than something to fear. The polite ghost knocking once might be one of those ancestors, gently reminding the living of their presence without imposing. A quirky tale from the time tells of spirits who could be invited in by sharing a bowl of rice or a cup of sake, but only if the host followed the proper etiquette. Failing to offer the correct respect could lead to a ghost who knocked once, then vanished, or worse, one who knocked again in frustration. Scholars debate whether these stories were cautionary tales encouraging good manners or genuine spiritual beliefs that guided daily conduct. You think about how these traditions reflect a culture that valued harmony above all else. Even in death, the etiquette remains, knocking once, waiting patiently, never overstaying your welcome. Outside, the city wakes, the soft sounds of footsteps and morning chatter weaving through the air. You step outside, feeling the sun's warmth and the cool breeze on your face. The world moves on, but those polite knocks linger in the corners of your mind, gentle reminders of connections that transcend time and space. As the day unfolds, you carry with you the quiet grace of those spirits who knock once and always wait. Once again, thick and velvety, dusted with the soft shimmer of distant stars. You lie still, the tatami beneath your body cool and reassuring, the paper walls faintly glowing in the moonlight. The air carries the faintest scent of incense and the distant murmur of a shamisen, weaving a melody that seems almost too delicate for the night. You recall how Edo's ghost stories weren't just about fear, but about connection, about the polite ghosts who knocked once and waited, teaching lessons in patience and respect. It's a part of the culture that valued silence and subtlety over loud demands. This echoes in how the city itself operated, with its rigid class structures and careful social rituals. A fascinating fact, some Edo-era storytellers described the polite ghost's knock as a kind of sound punctuation, a soft, respectful full stop at the end of a sentence, signaling that the spirit's presence was acknowledged but not intrusive. On a quirky note, there were tales of ghosts who used their single knock as a form of poetic communication, almost like Morse code, to relay messages to the living. Decoding these taps was a pastime for some, a game of listening closely and interpreting the whispers of the past. Historians still debate whether these stories were widely believed or more of a niche folklore among Edo's literati, but they add a layer of mystery and charm to the whole phenomenon. You feel the gentle rhythm of your breath slowing, the night's calm wrapping around you like a soft kimono. Outside, the cicadas sing a distant chorus, their sound mingling with the soft rustle of leaves. The polite knock lingers at the edges of your consciousness, always one, never more, patient and respectful. You imagine the ghost waiting beyond the door, bowing silently, and then fading back into the shadows. There's a strange comfort in knowing that even the unseen follow the rules, that etiquette extends beyond life itself. Your eyes grow heavier, the soft hum of the night coaxing you deeper into rest. And as you drift off, you hear it again, the single, polite knock that says, "I am here, but only as much as you allow." You sink deeper into the quiet night, where shadows and memories swirl softly together. The city of Edo seems to breathe around you, ancient yet alive, every wooden beam and paper screen holding stories whispered long ago. You feel the gentle presence of those polite ghosts, knocking once, waiting patiently, never demanding, always respectful. In Edo, life and death were seen as two parts of the same endless flow, much like the changing seasons. People accepted that spirits might linger, not to frighten, but to remind, to connect. The polite knock was a gesture of civility, a soft invitation to acknowledge what lies just beyond sight. A historical note to carry with you. Many Edo families passed down ghost stories as oral traditions, blending fact and fiction until they became part of everyday life. Comforting, cautionary, and sometimes just quietly entertaining. A quirky detail. Some tales speak of ghosts who would knock once and then leave behind the faintest scent of plum blossoms or fresh rain. A subtle signature like a polite bow or a whispered farewell. Historians still debate the origins and meanings of these stories, whether they were primarily spiritual beliefs, social tools, or imaginative folklore. As you settle into the softness of your futon, the city outside grows quieter, the last lanterns flickering out one by one. You think about the invisible boundaries that hold us all, the limits we honor in life and in death. The polite knock becomes a lullaby, a steady, gentle rhythm that soothes the mind. You feel safe knowing some things remain constant, that respect and patience echo beyond the veil. As your eyes close and the world fades, the soft knock lingers, an echo of kindness from a time long past. And in this stillness you drift off, carried by the quiet grace of Edo's polite ghosts. Wind down. Now as the last whispers of Edo's night settle softly around you, let your breathing slow, your muscles relax, and your thoughts drift like leaves on a gentle stream. Imagine the polite ghosts bowing respectfully, waiting patiently, and fading into the quiet shadows without a sound. There's no rush here, only calm, a soothing pause between moments. The lantern light dims, the streets grow silent, and the cool night air carries the faint scent of plum blossoms and rain. Feel the warmth of tradition and the comfort of stories that stretch across centuries, reminding you that respect and kindness exist even in the quietest of knockings. Let your mind rest on that soft rhythm, that single polite tap, a gentle invitation to peace. And as you settle into sleep, know that you are held in a space where the living and the unseen coexist in harmony, where every story, every knock is part of a delicate balance. Sleep now, softly and deeply, wrapped in the quiet grace of Edo's past, and let the gentle hum of the night carry you into dreams filled with kindness and calm. End of script. Sweet dreams.
The day wears on, and the streets of Edo hum with their usual rhythm. Merchants calling out their wares, children chasing each other through narrow lanes, and the occasional clatter of wooden geta on cobblestones. You find yourself wandering past a small shrine tucked between two buildings, its faded torii gate standing like a sentinel, guarding unseen secrets. Here's a fact. Shrines in Edo were often maintained not just by priests, but by the community, who believed that keeping the spirits happy was a collective responsibility. This idea ties into why polite ghosts knocking once were rarely seen as malevolent. They were part of the community's spiritual landscape. On a more whimsical note, some stories tell of ghosts who knocked once and then played harmless pranks, like hiding sandals or rearranging futon blankets. It was their way of saying hello without causing harm, almost like a spectral hello from the other side. Historians still argue whether these tales originated as explanations for everyday oddities, or if they were genuine folklore shared to teach lessons about respect and kindness. As you linger near the shrine, you notice offerings left on the stone altar: rice, sake, and small paper cranes. These gestures feel like a quiet conversation between the living and the unseen, an ongoing exchange of respect. You recall the knock again, a single, polite tap that isn't a demand but an invitation to recognize and remember. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows that stretch like ghostly fingers across the wooden facades. The city shifts from bustling to quiet, the evening drawing in with soft lantern light. You think about how the polite ghost's single knock is both a barrier and a bridge, respecting boundaries while asking for acknowledgement. As darkness falls, the air cools, and the world seems to hold its breath, waiting. You feel the gentle pull of sleep creeping back, like the faint knock echoing in your mind. There's comfort in the patience of these polite ghosts, in their quiet insistence on manners and respect, even beyond the veil. You settle back down, the tatami beneath you warm from the day's sun, and close your eyes, ready to cross once more into that whispered world.